We got the shooter in Texas, just north of San Antonio. We know why he was pissed off. He was pissed off at his mother-in-law. He's had all kinds of interesting problems that they tried to treat. He was in the Air Force, and he was in the Air Force, and the Air Force didn't do anything about his problem. Well, they did. They tried to. They sent him to treatment, but the problem was that the Air Force didn't tell everybody else that this guy's whacked out. So that's how he got away with what he did. That's why he got a gun.
So the Air Force is in trouble?
I don't know. We'll see what happens. The Air Force is making sure that theoretically he slipped through the cracks. So the Air Force is going to make sure that they don't have anybody else that slipped through the cracks. The reality is, I hate to talk about the military in a negative way. The United States military, a lot of people join the military who have mental problems. They have an obsession with weapons. So they join the Army, they join the Marines, they join the Air Force. Or the Navy. The Navy has just as many problems. Probably the Army has more problems than anybody else, and the Marines. But usually, by the time they have gone through basic training, they have already figured out that these people are not people that can handle it.
Or they leave halfway through.
Yeah, they'll board them out. They'll board them out. They'll give them a medical board and decide that they can't handle the stress. So they will just board them out. And of course nothing has happened, so they're not going to turn these people in, despite the fact that they were only in the service for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever. So usually they're able to get to determine who these individuals are before they get too far in the service. This guy was in for 2 years, and I guess in the second year he started beating his wife and is shaking his infant son, which is stupid. You can really do a lot of damage. You can kill somebody with shaking. Okay, so we know he had a problem, and we know the Air Force didn't tell anybody about it. What's the other thing that we know? We know that he was pissed off at his in-law. Evidently, his wife broke up with him, and he blamed his in-laws. That's his mother-in-law, the grandmother, and they went to that church. He went to that church. But there's kind of a kicker in there. The minister didn't want him in the church. He didn't want him to come to church, which I know. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? You would think that, well, you would think that a church setting like that, you would want people that were hurting. Isn't that the way it works?
No.
I don't understand religion very well. Aren't they supposed to?
I heard, yeah. All shall be welcome.
Sure, everybody should be welcome. That's the whole point. No matter whether you're tired, poor, humble, or you've got all kinds of interesting diseases. Shouldn't a church try to minister to you? No?
Well, because he already took a, what do you call that? Something where they declared him insane somewhere. Was it in Albuquerque? Or somewhere? Maybe his actions were too great, like maybe he was too hostile. Because the grandmother was there, the mother-in-law was warned. But what kind of text messages was she getting from him, And if he was that severe of a threat, how come you didn't call the cops or say, this is how we feel and we think we're in danger? And
maybe they thought that he wasn't going to do it or do anything at all. Maybe he just says he'll do it and never does it and finally does and then no one believes him.
Well, I'm under a death threat. I told you, that guy told me that if I ever come back to Indiana, he's going to shoot me. Should I believe him?
Yeah.
I should. Well, maybe I never. And I went back for my 50th high school reunion, and I stupid a lot. I could be dead. He could have come into the reunion and shot us all like with his hunting rifle. He's a deer hunter. It just seemed to me that churches shouldn't reject people. I don't know. That's just me. Maybe I'm mistaken.
Unless they knew about his behavior.
Yeah, right, but even if they knew about his behavior, shouldn't they try to help him?
Yeah, that's
Or
what church
have him get help and then come back?
No, they should try to help him. They should bring him in. I mean, the more he prays, the more, isn't that going to help? Isn't that
I
going to
know.
heal him?
Yeah, it would. I think it would have too.
I know, like in my church, you know, because I kind of almost go to the same kind of church, and in my church, if we had somebody like that, we would probably ask to counsel him outside of the church first, and then slowly, gradually bring him in, you know.
Curtis and I want the guy to go to church so that we can fix him, right? And how we're going to fix him? By bringing Jesus to it or whatever. Sorry, no. I'm just, it's just, go ahead. So maybe I'm mistaken. Pastoral care, I think that's called pastoral. So Curtis and I want him fixed. We want to bring him into the church. That's where he learns peace, right? Well, we're not going to talk about, they will probably not talk about this anymore, and I probably won't either because I'll get in trouble. I need to be careful. But with everybody except Curtis, of course, because we agree. I know, thanks. And Sheldon. And Sheldon. Maybe Brian. Maybe I'm okay. But the back row is going.
We won't be here too, so.
Just a thought. Just a thought. So, but we're not going to hear any more about that. It's almost like a shunning. Yeah, and wow. I don't know if you've ever been shunned, but it ain't a good feeling. I didn't want to ever shoot anybody.
I think it's the same for those that have committed suicide as well. Kind of like a comparison.
Mm-hmm.
A sort of almost parallel to one another. You know, I should have just let him in, or I should have let her in.
Right.
But before, because of his behavior, I had to let her.
Right.
Him or her be.
That's a good point.
After the incident, then.
I wish I had tried to do something.
Yeah.
Doesn't that also
No
happen when
one's
people
going back
that,
to that church.
doesn't that also happen with people that do try to commit suicide and then are failed the attempt or don't do it? They're kind of shunned because they tried anyway. It's in some cultures.
Right. Yeah, some cultures will shun them. Yeah. Yeah. Shunning's pretty vicious if you think about it. Anyway.
Church's chicken reserves the right to reserves to those that chimney. See that, right?
Yeah.
They have money to pay for their meal, but because of their appearance and then because of their attitude, they deny service to them.
That's not.
And this the right?
That's not right either. Should never do
No
that.
shoes, no
Yeah,
shirt.
as long as you got a shirt and shoes on, why in the world shouldn't you serve them? I try to wear shoes all the time. I got shoes on today.
You got socks on?
I do. Can I see my socks?
No.
No?
No.
Brian,
The-
I bet
Halloween costume one?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Brian, his shoe size is longer than we were seeing.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. My people, big feet. Oh. My dad only had 8.5. He was only 8.5. My brothers, 8.5. Me, 12. What's that all about? I don't know. Big feet. Mental health experts can be involved in hearings and trials in many civil areas, including the following: psychological damages to civil plaintiffs, workers' compensation claims, the assessment of civil competence, psychological autopsies, and that's exactly what's going on right now with I can't even remember his name. Well, whatever his name is, the shooter.
In Vegas.
Well, the one in Vegas, yes, but also the guy in San Antonio. Yeah, we're doing a psychological autopsy, trying to figure out what's going on. or why he did what he did. Child custody and parental fitness, civil commitment and risk assessment. Really kind of interesting with this guy because we've determined that the system broke down, and where it broke down was with the Air Force. The Air Force dropped the ball. They knew that he had a mental problem. They sent him to treatment, and then they didn't tell anybody about it. And he fell through the cracks. It's just a falling through the cracks situation. So, of course, we don't want this to happen again. We certainly don't want another Las Vegas shooter. We certainly don't want another San Antonio shooter. So we do psychological autopsies with these select individuals. An expert can testify if the testimony is relevant. The usefulness of the testimony outweighs whatever prejudicial impact it might have. And if the judge believes that the testimony is based on sufficiently relevant and reliable scientific evidence, for example, the Daubert-Cumbo criteria, the testimony must be founded on solid science. We're not looking for opinion here. And of course, this is one of the problems that we have right now as far as the news is concerned. We get opinion as news, and people start repeating the opinion. One of the interesting things about, if you go to the Fox section, they don't really tell you whether it's opinion or news. They just give you the information. If you go to CNN, however, CNN will say analysis. They will tell you whether it's news, whether it's analysis, or whether it's opinion. So you know exactly what you're dealing with, which is really kind of interesting. And of course, this can be a potential problem if it's just the psychologist's opinion that this man is insane. That's one thing. But if he can empirically show you that this individual has a problem, that's completely different. What we have now is most judges will not accept opinion. They want solid science. And that's using the Daubert-Cumbo criteria. Judges often have trouble evaluating scientific evidence, thus the concern that jurors will be exposed to junk science, and of course that's really not a very good idea. We were talking in class the other day with Dr. Green. I think that's her name, the skinny little...
Oh, no.
Yeah, you know, she was talking about re-immersion therapy, where the individual, they wrap the person up as if they were in the birth canal and they have to squeeze out of... Yeah, as odd as that seems.
What class was that for?
Oh, she was just talking before our class, and we were talking about the re-immersion therapy. Which is outlawed now, by the way. It's no longer legal to do that. You can't do that. Too many people have been injured and died because what happens is they wrap them up in a rug, and then they have to fight their way through this, out of this rug, with people laying on top of them. It's like being reborn. Well, the idea is that it's like being reborn.
It doesn't sound safe at all.
Yeah, I know. It sounds kind of strange, and I think it's... but it's based on some fairly questionable science. There's not a whole lot of empirical evidence behind using that type of therapy. Smith in 1989 cites the following potential objection to testimony by psychological or psychiatric experts. The scientific foundation for much of the testimony offered in court is often less than adequate. Much of the testimony is of limited relevance. Experts are too often permitted to testify about ultimate issues, which should be left to juries to decide, of course. They should never talk about anything in absolutes. This man is crazy. You can't say that. This man appears, when I counseled him, when I talked to him, when I investigated his problem, he looked like this was the problem. Even somebody who's suffering from schizophrenia does not suffer from, they are not in crisis all the time. So you really can't say this person is schizophrenic. You can say this person has schizophrenic episodes. There are times when he has erratic thoughts. but you can't say he always has this problem. There are no absolutes. So strangely enough, psychology doesn't deal with absolutes. And the reality is, most knowledge is circumspect. Everything is. Whether it's Freud, it doesn't really matter what it is. Even physics. Physics is not always, it may be the same on Earth, but what if you go out into space? What if you're on Mars? Will the physics be exactly the same? And the answer is probably no. And of course we know that. Is the physics always the same on Earth? No. We know that there are areas of the Earth where people weigh differently. You'll weigh one thing here, you'll weigh something, another weight someplace else. Okay. Expert testimony is frequently used to introduce information that would otherwise be prohibited because it is hearsay. The adversarial system compromises experts' objectivity because it's an adversarial system. What does that mean? That means if you've got a good lawyer, then your lawyer can probably argue anything to the point that it doesn't matter anymore. So it's an adversarial system. It really all depends on the quality of the lawyer. You are a scientist, but they are not. So they don't understand what you're talking about. They really don't understand what you're talking about. So what they will ask you to do in court is they will ask you to explain it so that they can understand it. Which means that potentially you're using phrases that change the meaning of what has happened. Not only that, but you're dealing with a group of individuals with very little information. So you don't know what they're taking away from what you've just said. And these, of course, are the jurors. And sometimes they will stock the jury with people that they know won't understand this type of testimony. That's the whole idea of the science of jury selection. Sometimes you put people on the jury that you think will be favorable to your client, and sometimes they don't have a lot of good information. They're not college educated. They're not. I'd like to say they're not very bright, but the reality is that we all have our own areas of knowledge, right? So potentially, if it's a medical problem, they don't want anybody with any medical knowledge on the jury. Because if they have medical knowledge, then they can't convince them of something that isn't really there. So they will select people with no medical knowledge whatsoever. Expert testimony is very expensive, and relying on experts gives an advantage to the side with more money. And this is, of course, a really serious problem. This is a problem we have in the United States anyway. If you're a wealthy person, you can afford to do just about anything. Right now, I just got an email from my grandson's father. We have to take him down to Florida over Christmas. And we're going to fly him down to Punta Gorda. You know where Punta Gorda is. It's over by Fort Myers. It's on the western side of the state. Well, he's on the eastern side of the state. He wants us to fly him into Fort Lauderdale. He's complaining that we're flying him to the wrong side of the state. But the reality is that we're going to save $800 by flying him into Punta Gorda, renting a car and then driving him over to Fort Lauderdale, to Delray actually. And he's complaining about that. He wants us to spend as much money as we possibly can. And the reason he wants us to do that is because eventually we will run out of money and then we can't do it anymore. Yes, ma'am.
So you say, like, basically if you're rich, you can pretty much buy the best lawyer and you'll almost get out of it. So I was watching Why Women Kill, and there was this lady on there, and they called her the Black Widow, and she had this sugar daddy, and she ended up having him murdered. Well, anyway, she paid her lawyer $2 million, and She didn't get off.
Oh, she didn't win the case.
She didn't, and she paid him $2 million. She had her girlfriend kill him, and her girlfriend testified against her.
Mhm.
And then, so her girlfriend got a lesser sentence. And the lady is spending the rest of her life in prison.
She turned state's evidence, the girlfriend did. And that's why she got and she plea bargained. I will testify against this individual if you give me only 15 years of prison. Yeah, that kind of thing happens all the time. So the reality is, the more money you have, the more likely you're going to be able to get off. One of the tricks that, well, I told you about AT&T. What AT&T did, they just drug it out for decades, literally for decades. And half the people that filed suit are dead. So, you know, and you can do this if you've got the lawyers and if you've got the money, because it was going to cost them tens of millions of dollars. And by paying these lawyers, whatever they paid these lawyers, they didn't have to pay those fines. Of course, they screwed all the people that they've screwed before, and they continue to be screwed. But of course, they won their case, or well, they didn't win the case. It's still in appeals, unfortunately. And there are a lot of people. If you've got the cash to do it, people will tie stuff up in court forever. So you think that you won, but you didn't win, because now you have to keep that lawyer on retainer until all the appeals run out. And then maybe you'll get some money, if there's anything left. But see, you're keeping your lawyer on retainer, and they're just dragging the thing out as long as they possibly can, so that you'll get tired or run out of money, and then have to quit the case. Because at any point, the case can stop. If you don't want to keep the case in the courts, you don't have the cash for it, now all of a sudden the case is dropped and Donald Trump wins again. Because he's got billions of dollars. He can keep cases in court forever. And people know that. That's one of the reasons why they negotiate with him. He'll hire the best stonemason in the world, and then he will build his building for him. And then one of the problems, and then of course he won't pay him. So he sues Donald Trump, and Donald Trump will put it in court for an extended length of time. It's really a tragedy. And that's what my grandson's father is trying to do to us. So he's trying to get us to fly from Chicago to Fort Lauderdale, which is expensive. Of course, we want to save the cash and fly on the other side of the state, but he says, oh, no, you can't do that. Because he's trying to run us out of cash. His family has all the money in the world. So we'll see what happens. He's kind of a bully, so we're trying not to be bullied by the SOB. I said SOB. That means short of breath. You know that, okay. That doesn't mean son of a bitch. It means short of breath. Okay, number 7, testing the reliability and validity of expert opinions through cross-examination is inadequate because attorneys are usually not well equipped to do this, and juries often fail to understand what is uncovered during the cross-examination. So this is a really serious problem. Nobody can understand what you're talking about. And of course they ask you to use language that they can understand. But you're dealing with a lawyer that knows the law, and he probably doesn't know anything else. So he has no clue what you're talking about. The jury, of course, were these people that you plucked off the street and put in the jury box. What's the probability they know what you're talking about? So the problem is that nobody understands what's going on. Experts disagreeing with one another in trial after trial ultimately reduces the public's esteem for the mental health professionals. And this is a problem because you've got, and normally what will happen is the prosecution gets their expert, psychological expert, and the prosecution will get theirs. The defense has one and the prosecution has theirs. So it's 1-to-1. One guy says yes, the other guy says no. So then the court calls in somebody, and he is the deciding factor. But of course, they're listening to all this testimony and determining, wait a minute, one guy inspected this guy, investigated this individual, and they found him to be insane, and the other guy found him to be completely lucid. And now why are they arguing? Isn't this an absolute? Shouldn't there be one criteria? But the reality is, of course, the experts, of course, are being paid by whoever's paying them, and they're coming up with that conclusion to fit the money that they're being paid. So it makes us look like we're mercenaries, and that we'll say anything to get paid, unfortunately. Grisso's 2003 Criticisms of Forensic Mental Health Assessment. Ignorance, not knowing or not using the proper legal standards. Irrelevance, providing evidence that goes beyond what is relevant to the proceedings. Intrusion, offering conclusions that impinge upon the court's domain. Insufficiency, providing limited supporting evidence for one's conclusions. And then incredibility, offering conclusions that are not justified by the evidence one provides. And of course, these are all the problems that we have with expert testimony. All of these interesting problems. And it is an adversarial system, so you'll get, the prosecutor will get to question you, well, it all depends on if you're a defense witness. If you're a defense witness, then your lawyer will ask you the questions, he will set you up, you'll give them the answers that he wants, and then the prosecution will get to query you. He will get to ask you questions and try to make your testimony seem like it's not true at all. And that's the way it works. So it makes expert witnesses look stupid, or like they don't know what they're talking about. To reduce the overly adversarial nature of expert testimony, some have proposed to limit the number of experts on a given topic, require that the experts be chosen from an approved panel, allow testimony only from experts who have been appointed by a judge. And of course, this is really kind of an interesting idea. That way you'd only have one expert, or maybe two experts. You could call in two experts. The problem is, of course, the judge doesn't really have the expertise either. He certainly doesn't have expertise as far as psychology is concerned. So who is he going to call in? Is he going to call in somebody from New York City? Is he going to call in somebody who has published a lot of articles? I have good news for you. We have hired another instructor, and I know that way I won't be overworked and underpaid. Anyway, we've hired a new instructor. She is a consult. She has worked as a consultant, and she's published pages and pages of articles. So this is somebody who has lots and lots of information, I'm really excited. Sarah's more excited than I am, but we're really excited that we have somebody to take over into the city. And somebody will be taking over into the city. Have you guys heard anything about that? No? Okay. Then I won't tell you anything about the city.
Not Saley.
Well, we already have two people here, and we have a slot into the city. So somebody will be into the city, and then there will be two of us here. So it's going to be exciting. It's going to be really exciting. I will be here, so you don't have to worry about me wandering off to the city. So there you go.
So is the judge that decides who like they brought in, I guess, the neuroscientist or something?
Yes, she's a neuroscientist.
I don't know. I mean,
On this thing?
Yeah, like, so is the judge that chooses or approves?
Well, no, right now it's the defense and the prosecution. They form their own expert witnesses.
Okay, so like a neuroscientist or something can be an expert witness?
Yeah, oh sure, yeah. And this lady is actually a neuroscientist, so you guys are, yeah, who knows what kind of information she's got for you. Her knowledge of the brain is extensive, so this is going to be exciting. And she is somebody that would be used as an expert witness. I don't know that she has been, but like I said, she has page after page of articles that she has published. So there you go. This is really exciting. It should be really exciting for you on another perspective. And she's going to be teaching online. I think she has one face-to-face class in the spring. I think she does. I think it's 111. I think she's teaching Jim's Psych, Introduction to Psychology. But she's going to be teaching other classes in ITV and online. So starting next year, yeah, she will have a classroom presence, whether it will be here or whether it will be in Tuba City. So we're all excited. All of us are excited. She's taller than us. She's like 6'2". This isn't right. That's not right, is it? People should be shorter than me, right? Everybody should be shorter than me. Shouldn't everybody be? I should be the tallest one, shouldn't I? Okay. She's tall. She's a tall lady. Sue Wolf is her name, Dr. Wolf. So congratulations, and she does work as an expert witness sometimes. Several reforms of expert testimony have been proposed. Courts should not allow clinical opinion testimony unless it can be shown that it satisfies standards of scientific reliability. Ban any reference to witnesses as experts. Instead, use opinion testimony or witnesses. Read a special instruction to juries before any opinion testimony in order to reduce its possible prejudicial impact. So anytime we're talking about opinion, it should be noted as opinion. If we have facts behind it, of course, then we should we need to state that it is fact and not opinion. So there is a difference between opinion and fact. If you bring somebody in as a character witness and they're talking about what a wonderful person you are, is that opinion or is that fact? I'm sorry?
Say that again.
If I bring in somebody as a character witness that says that I'm a really cool guy, is that opinion or is that fact?
Opinion.
It is opinion, isn't it? And potentially it's hearsay if somebody else told you that I was a fun guy. If they told you that, it was a lie. So, which is a tragedy. I know it's a tragedy. It bothers me all the time. When one party is injured by the actions of a second party, the injured individual can sue the second party to recover monetary damages as compensation for the injury. This action is covered by an area of civil law known as torts. So if you have ever watched any of those criminal justice television shows, they always talked about torts. If you've ever watched a movie about law school, torts was a class that everybody took. A tort is a wrongful act that causes harm to an individual. So what does that include? Well, that just includes just about anything. People can sue you for just about anything. What happened over the weekend? Oh, Rand Paul got beat up. His neighbor beat him up. His neighbor broke 5 ribs. Yeah, 5 ribs. Poor Rand Paul. Rand Paul. He's a senator from Kentucky. I think he's from Kentucky. He's got his father ran for president. Not RuPaul. RuPaul doesn't. No, Rand Paul. And what were they arguing about? Well, what they were arguing about landscaping, evidently. I have no clue what was going on. I know. So they got into a fight. So now somebody's probably going to get sued. I'm guessing somebody's going to get sued. Or charged with assault. Who knows what's going to happen next? But potentially what's going to happen is maybe this should have gone to court. So whatever their argument was about landscaping, maybe it should have gone to court. And if it had gone to court, one of them would have filed suit against the other one for damaging their property or something, whatever. And that would have gone to tort. That would have been a tort case. where one person says, I was damaged by this, therefore they need to monetarily compensate me. This happened with, was it Miley Cyrus? No. It was Taylor Swift. They claimed that photographer groped her. Yeah, and it was a tort case. It was a tort case, and what the decision was that there was no proof. I guess that was a decision. And if it had happened, then it was, I don't know. Anyway, they charged him $1. Damages were $1. So damages can be anything. Well, that was a tort case. It was a civil case. They took it, Taylor Swift filed suit against him for groping her. And it was a tort case. She wanted compensation. 4 elements are involved in proving a tort in a court of law. If it can be established that there was a duty that was breached, which proximately caused the harm resulting, then a tort can be proven in a law case. So there was a duty that was breached. They promised something, and it caused harm to the other select individual. That is how you prove a tort case. Well, the cases that keep coming up as far as Donald Trump is concerned usually have to do with somebody didn't do something. And he's always screaming that he's going to sue people if they say anything bad about it. One of the things that has happened with what's happening now is those people sign non-disclosure agreements. He has everybody sign a non-disclosure agreement. Okay, so Manafort has signed a non-disclosure agreement. Gates has signed a non-disclosure agreement. Papadopoulos has signed a non-disclosure agreement. So if anything happens and they prove that Donald Trump did something, he can sue them. He could turn around and sue them in tort. In a tort court, he can file a tort case against them for going against breach of contract, because there was a non-disclosure agreement. I know, this is kind of interesting. He has everybody sign a non-disclosure agreement. He's not a dumb fellow. He's pretty damn smart. So now he can sue them. You have a question.
Okay, so with that guy that is being charged or being accused of all those people that are that
Weinstein?
Yeah, Weinstein.
Harvey Weinstein.
Okay.
Or Kevin Spacey.
What if a lady passed away, but that happened to her, and the parents know about it, but she never filed or anything? They can't prove it.
No, there's a couple problems. There are a couple problems. If it's too long ago, then she can't file. Because it's too long ago, the evidence is gone. So they won't even engage. They won't even think about the problem. There's only one problem that does, or there's only one crime that you can commit that doesn't have a statute of limitations, and that is homicide. In most states. In some states, if the murder happened too long ago, then they won't even look at the case. In some states. All the states are different. They've all got their own laws. And usually they wrote those laws for a reason, to exonerate somebody or whatever. But usually there's a statute of limitations. A good example would be the lady that was raped by Harvey Weinstein, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. There's nothing they can do about it. Its statute of limitations has run out. So you have a certain amount of time to file suit, unfortunately. I mean, that's the way it works. And usually, with some sex cases, it really all depends on, like if a child was abused, then potentially whatever state they may happen to be in, they may not have a statute of limitations on child abuse or child molestation. But it all depends on the state. So if Harvey Weinstein, I don't know, it really all depends on the time. And it also depends on where it took place. If it was in California, they have one set of laws. If it happened in Arizona, it's another set of laws. So it really all depends on where it is as to whether somebody can can sue or not. And probably what would happen is, it wouldn't be a criminal case, it'd probably be a tort case, where they would get compensation. They're not trying to throw him in jail, they're trying to get compensation for whatever happened. So, you know, it really all depends. A good example is O.J. Simpson. If he did what they say he did, what he was accused of, if he actually murdered his ex-wife and Ronald Goldman, well, of course, the criminal case is gone. They've already tried it. But then they tried him in civil court. They tried him for impinging on Ronald Goldman's civil rights by killing him, and he lost. So he still has to pay restitution to the Goldman family, and it's several $1 million. So, and he hasn't paid it all off yet. So.
But he gets $26,000 a month in retirement from
the NFL.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
But and probably they will give him some money to live on, but he'll have to pay some of that to the Goldman family,
Yeah.
which seems kind of odd. He had to auction off his Heisman Trophy, and the money went to the Goldman family. Historically, the law sought to compensate victims who were physically hurt or sustained property losses, but was reluctant to allow compensation for emotional distress. This is the old days. How you doing, Johnny?
Doing all right.
Okay, good. I got your email this morning.
Oh, yeah?
Okay, good. This has changed in recent years. Now 2 types of psychological injuries are claimed in civil suits. Those arising from negligent behavior. And this is an example of negligent behavior. They put out a sign that said caution wet floor. But potentially they made the floor wet at a time when there was traffic, too much traffic on the floor. This arising from extreme and outrageous conduct that is intended to cause distress. So if I do something, if I scream at you guys that you need to turn your papers in, if you don't turn them in 15 minutes, then I'm gonna lock the doors and start beating on the walls. I don't know, whatever. You know, that's outrageous. That's just extreme and outrageous conduct. It just doesn't make any sense. So you guys could sue me for not telling you that I wanted your papers at this point. If I just decided right now that I was going to do that. So that would be outrageous and extreme and outrageous behavior. No, don't worry about your papers. Get them in by December and I'll be happy. I'll be happy if I get them by December. Because, when's the last day of class? 1st of December?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm going home. I'm going home. So I'll be in Iowa from the 3rd until January. So,
are you going to drive or fly?
Of course I'm going to drive. I have 2 cars. I'm going to drive one of them. I'll drive the one that will ride in the snow. And one that won't.
Just grab the other one.
Yeah. I'll drive it for you if you want me. Thanks. You're a pal. In recent years, an increasing number of cases have dealt with psychological injuries resulting from the tort of sexual harassment, usually in the workplace. And of course, that's what's going to happen to Harvey Weinstein. He's going to lose a lot of money. That's what happened to O'Reilly, Bill O'Reilly. If you know the situation with Bill O'Reilly, they paid a $32 million settlement, and then they renewed his contract. Like the next week, they renewed his contract after paying a $32 million settlement for sexual harassment. So why was it a $32 million settlement? Well, it was a tort case. It was a tort case, and they were paying damages. It was a sexual harassment case.
What kind of damages would you have to suffer to get
$32 million? You know, that's what they agreed on.
So it must be the lawyer that she had.
Exactly. Well, of course, the lawyer gets a third. He's going to get a third of the settlement. You Oh, I get a third of the settlement. Well, that's $10 million. That's almost $11 million. So the client is only going to get 2/3 of what he gets. Of course, he's going to ask for the moon, hoping that, of course, he gets a call. Yeah, exactly. He's going to start off way up here, and they probably started off at $100 million, and they negotiated down to $32 million. I mean, that's the way it works. Because the more money they ask for, the more money he's going to get. And of course, the more money he asks for, the more money his client's going to get. But he knows he's going to get 1/3 of the settlement, so he's in good shape. Plaintiffs can seek both compensatory damages, payment for injuries suffered, and punitive damages, punishing the company for its failure to respond properly to the misconduct. A good example would be the tobacco industry. I can remember, you can't, because you're all too young, but I can remember when it was against the law to even question tobacco as to whether it was a health hazard or not. And eventually, back in the 60s, they determined that tobacco was a health hazard. And at that point, they started putting the little labels on tobacco. At that point. The tobacco company had hired their own scientists to do research. And these were the only people that were allowed to do research with tobacco. If anybody else tried to do it, they were sued. And they lost a lot of money because the tobacco companies always won. Why? Because they had lawyers that would drag this thing out forever. Forever, literally forever. And this went on for 20 years. And there were cigarette commercials on television all the time. Everything. I mean, it was every third commercial was a tobacco commercial. If you watch old episodes of I Love Lucy, Lucy and Ricky used to go out on stage before the show and smoking Old Gold cigarettes and talking about how wonderful the taste of Old Gold cigarettes were. Same thing with Red Skelton, with everybody. I mean everybody. One of them was a cigar, he advertised cigars. Ernie Kovacs had a television show. Of course, he smoked cigars, and his wife smoked cigars. Edie Adams was his wife. And she smoked cigars, and she'd come out smoking a cigarillo, which is a little cigarette.
And people smoked in their offices in movies back then.
Of course.
You know, that you would watch them walk into an office and sit down and start talking to somebody, and here they have the ashtray right here, and they're smoking, and like the whole cubicle area is full of smoke.
It's just full of smoke. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
When I was in the military, when I was first in the military, this is in the 70s, everybody smoked at their desks. It was nuts. If you watch old films of Carl Rogers, when he was counseling people, he'd be just puffing away on a cigarette, and his client would be puffing away on a cigarette. It's funny, because you never see people smoke anymore. And here is Carl Rogers just, you know, smoking on a fag. He's just, and the client, and there's an ashtray full of cigarette butts in between the two of them. It's just crazy. It's crazy. And of course, now it's against the law. I mean, it's against the law to smoke in a building. It's against the law to smoke in a public place in most states. They're all
in your car with children.
I guess your car is the only place you can smoke.
No, well, if you have children in there, it's against the law.
I hope so, but is it
Because
really?
you do see it, especially in Albuquerque, you
Yeah.
do see it. You know, you'll see women flying ape shit down the road, you know, smoking a cigarette with their kids in the back. But
Maybe it's not against the law.
now.
Maybe it's not against the law in New Mexico. It's a state law. I don't know. What state, in which state do people smoke more than any other state?
Montana.
It's not Montana.
Iowa.
No. It's Oklahoma. Forget it. You guys are number 3. I know. Oklahoma's number 1 or 2, and Arkansas is number 1 or 2, and Texas is number 3. State full of idiots, I guess. No offense to people from Texas. Okay, so you're going to get paid twice. You're going to get get paid for compensatory damages, and you're going to get paid for punitive damages. And of course, what they did with the tobacco companies, they made the it's like $283 billion. But most of that's going to advertisement to try to get people not to smoke. Because the tobacco companies knew that their product was causing cancer and heart disease and all kinds of problems. And they forced people not to do research to determine this. So where did they determine that tobacco was evil? It was up in Canada, where they're not being controlled by our courts, of course. Do they grow any tobacco in Canada? Hell no, they don't. It's too cold up there. They grow tobacco in Kentucky and North Carolina and
Well, in
Tennessee.
Canada, they have the limitations of tobacco.
Oh, yeah.
Like if you want a roll of Copenhagen, you can take that roll and take it over across and sell that for like, shoot, $150 for a roll of Copenhagen. And then menthol cigarettes.
That sounds like smuggling to me. Are we smuggling tobacco into Canada?
Yeah. And then like for menthol cigarettes, they banned the menthol ones up there.
Mm-hmm.
So people will come across to the States and they'll just totally stock up and they'll bootleg it up there.
They have to hide it because that's smuggling.
Yeah. Well, customs isn't that bad, like right in the Pagan port, but
You have to declare what you're taking across the border.
sometimes. But well, I mean, like my stepmom, you know, she's been doing it for years, you know, and they have a dog.
Then it's okay. This is too much fun. You know, if we turn in your mother-in-law, then is it your mother-in-law?
Yeah, my stepmom.
Your stepmom. We can get paid. Yeah.
Don't forget your
I know. Exactly.
She used to bring. Okay.
No, we can get paid for that. This is going to be good money.
But yeah.
Okay.
You're being
Yeah.
Listen,
So if we did that, Canada would be paying us.
yeah, probably. It'd probably be Canada. I would imagine it is. She's smuggling it from the United States into Canada. Yeah, so Canada would pay us.
And then she's bringing illegal stuff,
Back?
substances to the
Oh, we
States.
get paid
There we go.
both
We get paid
ways.
both ways.
No, she was.
She's not doing it anymore.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
of course
she's
not.
doing
Rats.
it.
Oh, we're not going to catch her. A clinician assessing a plaintiff will typically conduct an evaluation that includes a social history, a clinical interview, psychological testing, third-party interviews, a review of available records. So the clinician is looking at all aspects of this select individual so that they can be an expert witness. The clinician forms an opinion about the person's psychological condition. The clinician determines whether the psychological problems were caused by, what they were caused by, were they aggravated by or existed before the tort. And of course, this has to do with suing for damages. Psychological damages. We're looking at psychological damages. Plaintiffs may be motivated to exaggerate their claims in order to improve their chances of winning large awards. Sometimes such symptom exaggeration or fabrication, which is called malingering, involves outright lying. And people will lie. I know, I'm shocked. I was as shocked as you are to find that out. In other cases, a real psychological disturbance is present, but the plaintiff exaggerates its seriousness. And of course, that's the problem. I'm sad, or is this depression that I need to be treated for? Well, if it's depression, I get more money. If it's just sadness, I don't get so much money. So let's call it depression, okay? I can act depressed. Every day I walk through a black wall, a black veil, and it's like being in a tunnel and there's no light at the end of the tunnel. There you go. How am I doing?
Open your eyes.
I'd say, yeah. Oh, that's it. When a worker is injured in the course of his or her job, the law provides for the worker to be compensated through a streamlined system that avoids the necessity of proving a tort. This system, available in all 50 states and in the federal government, is known as the Workers' Compensation Law. And guess what's happening in this administration?
Getting rid of it?
They're trying to get rid of it.
Are you serious?
Of course I'm serious. It costs them too much money. Workers' compensation is paid by insurance, and the insurance is relatively expensive for the companies. And so they're trying to cut back on workers' compensation.
So for smaller businesses, it's too expensive, but for like, say, a campus, it wouldn't really be that bad, right?
It's about the same for everybody. Yeah. They're trying to do away with it. So what happens if you're a worker that gets hurt? Well, as long as it doesn't cost them very much money, the company very much money, then people are happy.
It's probably the wages that
Actually, the company has to pay it. It can't come out of your wages. Workers' compensation insurance, I know, Social Security comes out of your wages, Medicare comes out of your wages, but they can't take workers' compensation out of your wages. They can't cut your wages in order to pay their workers' compensation. We've been fighting about this for 50 years, about workers' compensation. We've been building this thing up for a really long time, and now they're trying to cut back on it. Select administrations, whenever a select party gets in power, they try to cut back on it. The other party tries to build it up. So at this point, we've had the other party in there, and so workers' compensation is pretty strong right now, but this is another party, and they're trying to cut back on it.
Well, in a way, I think I kind of agree,
Okay.
you know, because,
Obviously, you've never been hurt on the job.
well, I worked for human resources at NAPI, you know, and we did have some people that, maybe there's a flaw in the system or something, but we did have some people that got hurt. And they totally milked it
Right.
until
Oh, yeah.
completely, you know,
Sure, there are unethical people on both sides.
yeah, so.
People that are trying to not pay as much money, people that are trying to get as much money out of the system as they possibly can.
So would that include death?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there is a criteria that deals with death. Yeah. But mostly it's people that get hurt. You know, the strange Aflac commercials, where the duck keeps throwing money at people. I don't quite understand that. I don't know. Why does a duck have money? What's that all about? Yeah, but yeah, that's what it has to do. The workers' compensation systems, employers contribute to a large fund that insures workers who are injured at work, and employers also waive the right to blame the worker or some other individual for the injury. And of course, that is why they go to court. They're trying to prove that the guy hurt himself on purpose, or it was his fault. If it's the worker's fault that he was injured, then they don't have to pay as much, or sometimes they don't have to pay anything at all.
Does that affect union workers too, or
I'm sorry, what?
does that affect union workers or non-union workers?
Well,
Is that the same thing?
it really all depends on the state. Some states are union states and some states aren't.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah. Unions are kind of interesting. They've been declining in the United States since Reagan. I don't know, well, you don't remember, but Reagan tried to do away, he didn't like unions, and he wanted to close them all, he wanted to close them down. So Patco, Patco was what was Patco? It had to do with guys that, the airplane guys. Not the pilots, but the ones that are in the towers. What do I think? I can't think of the word. Okay. Exactly, yeah. So what he did, they were a federal union, and he fired them all. Everybody in Patco he fired. And he brought in military air traffic controllers. They were air traffic controllers. So he brought in military air traffic controllers. And of course, they don't understand civilian stuff. And, oh, it was a mess. Oh my God, we had planes crashing, not all over the place, but planes were crashing. You know, people were running, they were running out of fuel because they were... So places like Chicago and Atlanta and Denver, there were hubs, and they have all these planes flying in from a lot of different directions. You know, wow, it was a mess. It was a huge mess. And of course, the conservatives were real happy about it because he was breaking the back of the unions, or he thought he was anyway. But Patco still is illegal in the United States, the air traffic controllers. Anyway, yeah, kind of a serious situation. If workers are compensated, the size of the reward they receive is determined by the type and duration of the injury, their salary at the time of the injury. So they will get a select percentage of their salary, and that will be their workers' compensation. And of course, the workers' compensation is paid out of this insurance fund that the employer has to maintain. In order to be in business, he has to maintain this. Now, what if we've got a guy that isn't paying Social Security, he's paying people under the table? What happens if his people get hurt? You only have to maintain workers' compensation for workers that are legal, not workers that are illegal. So if you're paying somebody under the table, then nobody knows that they're working for you. You're not paying Social Security on them. The way Social Security works, some of the money comes out of their paycheck, but the employer has to match that money. So if I'm making $1,000 a month and they're taking out $300 for Social Security, then the employer is paying $300 also. So $600 is going into Social Security. That's the way it works. It's the same way with Medicare. So I'm paying a certain amount of money into Medicare. My employer is paying an equal amount.
So since the Navajo Nation is sovereign, and basically like all the Native American Indian reservations say they're sovereign, and they want to do away with workers' comp and everything, and because we're sovereign, do you think we will do away with it too? Because I know all the worker comp claims go to the Navajo Nation.
Yeah, this is the way it works. Yes, you're sovereign, but you accept federal money, and anytime you accept federal money, now all of a sudden you have to follow federal laws. If you're going to accept any federal money, you have to follow federal laws. So in order for you to be sovereign and not have to pay workers' compensation, then you'd have to give up all your federal money. If Jeff owns a company, what do you want to build? He builds buildings, and he builds a building for the federal government. He has to follow in order for him to be contracted by the federal government, he has to follow all federal laws. In other words, he can't discriminate. Jeff can discriminate all he wants as long as he doesn't have take any federal money. A school in the United States can exclude anybody they want. They can, if it's a Baptist school, they can only take Baptists. They can only take white people. They can only take pretty people until they start taking federal money, and then they have to follow all federal laws.
I know when we were building the IT department over there, the lady who got the grant, the school was kind of hesitant about getting this grant because it was federal money,
right.
And they were saying, we don't want to be known as a federal school. Well, I don't know, that was back in that administration, you know,
Sure.
but we are basically federal,
Oh,
you
sure.
know, and versus like SKC, you know, they're probably completely all federal.
Oh,
But-
sure.
But, when they said that, what are they talking about? Like, are they getting like different kind of money? Like, cause financial aid is federal.
Yeah, there's different piles. People are on Pell, and that's federal money. So you're already a federal school. I mean, you're already taking money from the federal government. That's where all the Pell and Stafford grants come out. Okay, so you're already a federal. Like, I mean, yeah. Okay. Otherwise, it's just too expensive to go here, right? Your tuition is rock bottom, right?
I pay my own tuitions.
Everybody else's tuition is rock bottom. I mean, and your tuition is probably not very high. If you went to ASU, it'd be a lot higher. Or NAU, yeah, as Jeff could tell us all. Yeah, because he has to pay, he's got a tuition bill to pay. Exactly, okay. But if you go here, because of the federal money, it's a lot cheaper to go here. And it's also subsidized by the tribe. So, yeah, there's not very, I mean, that's not a bad deal. When you wander off to get your master's degree, wherever you go, you're going to be shocked as to how much money you're going to be paying and what kind of loans you're going to have to take out just in order to do it. Hopefully, all of you will get a scholarship of one kind or another, but it's still going to cost you to live wherever you're going. And we can all, Jeff's going to come back and give us all this information after next semester, because he's going to ASU. Congratulations, Jeff, for being admitted in ASU. Not the easiest thing in the world. They, yeah, not everybody gets in, even though it's a state school. Yeah, they don't have to take everybody. That's just the way it works. Yay. Good old Jeff. Workers can seek compensation for physical and psychological injuries suffered at work. The cost of whatever treatment is given, lost wages will come out of workers' comp, and the loss of future earning capacity. In other words, if the doctor tells me that I can't work for 6 months because I have a back injury that needs surgery, of course, workers' compensation will pay for the surgery, or the insurance will pay for the surgery. And I will get 6 months of wages. That will be part of the workers' compensation as well. I won't get 100%. So if I'm making $1,000 a month, they may give me $500 a month or $600 a month. I won't get 100% of my wages, but I will get something, and that all comes out of workers' compensation. The more people that are hurt on your on the job in your company, the more insurance money they have to pay. The more it costs the company. So if you know, we're an educational institution, what's the probability of somebody getting hurt here? Well, there are people that do get hurt, but if we were a construction company and we were working way up, then we would have a lot more injuries than we have here at this institution. So these are the things that they have to pay. Formal trials are not held and juries do not resolve these cases. They are heard and decided by a hearing officer or a commissioner. Clinicians are often asked to render an opinion about the existence, cause, and the implications of any mental disorders that an individual may have. And of course, that is something that we as psychologists may have to do. Claims for mental disability usually arise in these ways. Physical mental cases, a physical injury can lead to mental disorder and psychological disability. A lot of times what you will see is if you've got a male that is fairly macho, he injures himself so that now somebody has to take care of him. This will bother his ego, and potentially he'll become depressed. And of course that's a possibility. If he is injured, he's usually a very physical person, and all of a sudden he has to lay in bed for 6 months. By the time he gets out of bed rest. He's gained a lot of weight, and of course that can cause depression, or it can cause a lot of interesting problems. He may become violent, because remember, when a male becomes depressed, one of the ways he tries to fight it is by aggression, with aggression. So he may become more aggressive, and this may be a problem that this individual will have. Mental cases, an individual suffers a traumatic incident at work that leads to substantial psychological difficulties. If he is doing something dangerous, potentially something traumatic will happen to him, and now he can't do that job anymore. And because he can't do that job anymore, he feels like he's less than he was before, or she's less than she was before. A good example would be, what if somebody were sexually harassed or even raped at work? And all of a sudden, we have not only a physical problem, we also have a mental problem. That this individual will be afraid to go to work.
Is it also for someone like if they go to the military and they have to learn to jump by the parachute, and then something happens to them, like it isn't open,
Right.
and they survive? Could that be going that?
Oh yeah. My goodness gracious. I don't know if you've ever seen people like that, but they break a lot of things. Like usually their legs.
So my dad knew someone that happened to when they first started going
Right.
parachuting, and it was one of his friends, but he's still okay. It's just, he's honestly wants.
Was he able to stay in the service? No. Okay. And now he's got 100% disability? The deal
It
about
was a freak accident, I guess, because they said they had everything right, but apparently something was missing.
And he survived the parachute crash.
It wasn't that high. It was
Oh.
yeah. So that's what I was
I
told.
don't know, if you've ever jumped off a 3-story building, a parachute drop is very high. No matter how high it is, it's still pretty damn high. You could,
That's what I was told. So I'm like, well, maybe it's not true. I don't know. I've never really
yeah, I know.
so-
Yeah, he probably fell in the right way, or,
Yeah.
I know, I understand. Yeah. I understand. The federal government's really kind of interesting because the federal government has to decide whether it's going to allow itself to be sued or not. Okay. Okay. Once upon a time, I was playing soccer and I ruptured my spleen. Went into the emergency room and they diagnosed it as bruised ribs. Well, if you know anything about spleens, they have a lot of vascularization, so the probability of bleeding to death was very, very relatively high. But I was lucky; I didn't bleed to death. Then I went back to the emergency room and they diagnosed me with bruised something else, not only bruised ribs, but a bruised liver or something. So, yeah, that's the second time I went in. The third time I went in, the guy said, I kept telling him, well, I feel distended. My abdomen feels distended. And he said, and he looked at me. Of course, he's this great big fat dumpy guy, and I'm this really skinny guy. And he said, it looks fine to me. Of course, it looks fine to you. You don't know what I looked like before. And so that was the third time. The fourth time I went in, he said, you know, you've got a ruptured spleen. We need to do surgery. This was in a military hospital. They needed to do emergency surgery. It had been like 18 hours since I ruptured my spleen. I know, I should have been dead. They kept telling me, you should be dead.
Good, I hope.
Okay, so now they need to take me to surgery. Well, they had 2 surgical suites at this hospital, and they were both being painted that weekend. I know. And that's one of the yeah, okay. And so he said, do you think you can come back tomorrow? And I said, you just told me that this is an emergency. He said, well, yeah, but tomorrow.
You're still alive.
I don't think so. Of course, my wife was, at the time, my wife was working at headquarters for the general. And and the general was the Surgeon General of SAC. So she called up the general, and he said, what? He's got a ruptured spleen and they're not going to do surgery? Oh my God. So he came down and they sent me downtown to Omaha. They sent me into Omaha. And they did emergency surgery, took my spleen out. So potentially I could have sued the federal government for it. I could have sued the idiot doctors, but of course you can't do that. But they wouldn't let me,
No,
of
it'll
course.
take you.
I know, exactly. Next time I'm sick, they just shoot me instead of. You know, I'm going to draw your blood with a gun in the head. Yeah, but we weren't allowed to. We weren't allowed to sue the federal government, even though they made mistake after mistake after mistake, to the extent that they didn't want to take me to surgery because they were painting the surgical suits. So they tried to make an excuse. I know. And luckily,
Agent Orange, is that something? Is that like a workman's compensation?
it is now. It is now. What happened initially after Vietnam or during Vietnam? We knew that there was a problem. They knew that there was a problem. And of course, the federal government wouldn't. They didn't want to compensate people for it because it'd be too expensive. We're getting the same thing in Iraq and Afghanistan from some of the things that are happening in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the federal government, you know, they get to decide themselves whether they're going to allow themselves to be sued.
So, like with the Agent Orange is, because like my dad right now, he's 90% disability. And one of them is from Agent Orange, and he was telling me, like, go to a clinic and get your left side checked out. And I was like, all right, I go, because of my eyes, you know. And he said, he thinks it's from Agent Orange, but I don't know, he thinks crazy it's from Vietnam, but.
We could talk about that. Agent Orange was a really stupid thing to do, and we were spraying it on ourselves. The Air Force personnel that were spraying it, they all got sick. They've died of cancer. I told you about my brother, got 100 tumors on his back. They were like fatty lipomas. They weren't really. They were benign. They were completely benign. But not everybody's is benign. You know, so it's a really stupid problem. We got the same thing going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're more worried about winning the war, than keeping our people safe. You can just think about how loud the damn cars, the airplanes, I mean, if you get into a commercial jet, it's not very loud, but you get into a military jet, my God, it's so loud. People go deaf. It's the same way with the Humvees. You know, you get into a Humvee, a commercial Humvee, and it's a nice quiet ride, but you get into a Humvee and you're just about deafened. That's why people wear earbuds and listen to music, because it's, you know, it's good for, and then they put all kinds of strange things in the vehicle. But the federal government doesn't have to be sued if they don't want to allow themselves to be sued. That's exactly what happened to me, and that's what happens to everybody. They try to get as much compensation. The VA tries to get as much compensation as they possibly can, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. How long did it take your dad to get 90% disability? Decades? Yeah, it's stupid. Yeah, they give him back pay for the 90%?
Yeah, they do.
Okay. Well, good for them. It must have been during the Obama administration.
Yeah,
it was. Okay.
It was like right around the time when Eloise called.
Yeah, okay, yeah. See, they had to allow that suit to go through. They fought that suit for decades. And of course, she was gone by the time they settled it. But she fought forever. And they destroyed the evidence. They destroyed all this evidence. They had no idea how much compensation they should have been giving everybody. Why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time. I know this is a lot of fun to talk about, except the federal government, because they're always